And I even doubt the resurrection, right? Coming into this book, there is no way that you can prove that, right? Right? I could not, and we're gonna go over it. I'm even gonna do an audiobook on this book because it was so good. Today, I am doing a book summary of Case for Christ, and this is just a summary. It doesn't go into all of the proof that Lee Strobel found. It's just a summary of the chapters, which is why I think you should read it. I am doing a 100-video podcast series on health and happiness in all different spheres: mental, physical, spiritual, relational. We have, do the math, I think 88. Gosh, I'm really bad at math. This book was incredible. All of the evidence that Lee Strobel found. First of all, Lee Strobel, let's talk about this guy. He was an atheist. He even hosted debates for the National Board of Atheists, I believe. This guy was an atheist. He was an atheist. Come on. He was a true atheist. He basically, he found out his wife became a Christian, and he was so peeved about it that he started a 2-year journey to try to disprove Christianity. And it was like a war to him. This guy went down every single road he could have, that he could think of. Very smart dude to try to just prove Christianity because he was so mad that his wife was a follower of Jesus. I will put a bunch of links down below for citations and things that were in the book that I think might be helpful if you're wanting to know more. But just read the book because it was awesome. Whether you're an atheist or a Christian, doesn't really matter. I didn't see the movie, but this book was great. So let's dig into it, shall we? He goes through an intense examination trying to prove the historical inaccuracy of Christ's resurrection, death, and all of that. And he basically ends up building evidence for the historical accuracy of the New Testament and the resurrection of Christ and death of Christ. So let's dig into it. Section 1, the skeptical journalist. This guy was an incredible journalist. This is before the times of fake journalism. It's all about hype and media. He was all about the truth. So this guy would go into courts, he would investigate what the truth is, unbiased. Of course, in this case, which I like about this book, he's very biased against Christianity, which is the only reason why I find it to be credible. Because if he's coming into this biased, and this book goes into that, whether it's biased or unbiased, if you're truly seeking for the truth, you will find it if you're not biased. And that's what I love about this book. And that's why I keep saying on my videos, the truth, if you seek for it, you will find it. And that's the goal of this book. The cool thing is he's very biased against Christianity. So everything that he tries to do, he's very learned on the opposite side of atheism. He's very learned on it. So he dives into interviewing scholars that believe in the opposite, but are also very smart and experts on the subject matter. So he writes, I thought the idea of an all-knowing, all-powerful creator in the universe was so absurd that it made more sense to me to assume that life arose from chance. So it's very interesting how he comes across this. Strobel decided to investigate with his journalism skills that he used in court and throughout his very long and very impressive journalist career. He gathers evidence against faith, and his initial approach is, I was determined to uncover the truth no matter where it led. He says that, but he was very biased. He did not want it to be true. Strobel's first line of inquiry was the historical reliability of the New Testament. According to the New Testament documents, so he sought out the reliability of the New Testament documents by seeking experts on the subject. He already didn't believe it's true. He brought a lot of evidence as to why it wasn't true and wasn't credible and why it isn't a document of antiquity. But here's what he found out. He sought out Dr. Craig Blomberg. He's a New Testament scholar, and he discussed the authenticity of the gospel accounts. So Blomberg affirmed there is strong evidence that the gospels were written by eyewitnesses or based on eyewitness accounts. Now, Blomberg emphasizes the early dating of the gospels is crucial for their reliability. The gospels were written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, which is critical for ensuring the accuracy of the accounts. This early dating challenges Strobel's assumptions that the Gospels were mythological writings. So not based on eyewitness accounts, not based on any crucial evidence, not based on evidence at all, and also was written after the eyewitness had died, credible eyewitnesses, or supposed eyewitnesses, right? And here's the thing. Normal antiquity, and this is what blew my mind about this book. There's so many things that blew my mind that I just don't have time to go into. Please read this. Dr. Daniel B. Wallace, a leading textual critic, highlighted, there are over 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, providing a robust foundation for verifying the original texts. So providing a robust foundation for verifying the original texts by the sheer number of them and how accurate each were to each other. This abundance of manuscripts reinforced the New Testament's authenticity. So Strobel moved on. So section 3, the resurrection evidence. So a pivotal part of Strobel's investigation was the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The entire religion of Christianity rests on, can we believe that Jesus rose from the dead? If you can believe that, then Christianity, the religion itself, all of it rests on that. If you can believe that, it discredits other religions and makes Christianity credible. So first of all, Jesus had to have been dead and he had to have risen. The disciples wrote the New Testament to prove Jesus's death and resurrection and what Jesus was all about. If you can disprove that, then Christianity doesn't even matter because it's fake, right? So that's what Strobel was going for. He consulted Dr. Gary Habermas, an expert on the resurrection, who presented compelling evidence for the empty tomb and post-resurrection appearances. That's what was interesting. I went into this book very skeptical myself. I've been a Christian most of my life, but I was like, there's no way. And I even doubt the resurrection, right? Coming into this book, there's no way that you can prove that, right? Right? Like, Habermas asserted, the evidence for the resurrection is not just strong, it's overwhelming. And this book went into why it's overwhelming and why it's strong, point by point by point, bullet point. Habermas emphasized the disciples' willingness to suffer and die for their belief in the resurrection. People do not die for what they know to be a lie. And this aspect deeply resonated with Strobel. It deeply resonates with me. And I thought I was the only person who really thought about this and made sense for it and that it mattered to, but apparently not. Apparently other people think this way. So this book was just like, so good. This resonated with Strobel and it challenged his skepticism further. Additionally, Strobel consulted with Dr. William Lane Craig, who emphasized the significance of the empty tomb. If the tomb were not empty, it would have been impossible for Christianity to get off the ground in Jerusalem. This historical evidence for the empty tomb further solidified Strobel's understanding of the resurrection. And what's interesting here is, and I think should be mentioned in this summary, none of the Jews of the time argued that there was an empty tomb. No one in that time argued against there being an empty tomb. The arguments were always why it was empty. So that argument alone that's cited in this book, there is no debate on an empty tomb. The Jews were always saying, not that there was an empty tomb in general and fighting that fact. It was always, oh, well, you must have taken his body. Oh, the Romans fell asleep. And all of those arguments are listed in this book and argued. Section 4, the psychological evidence. So Strobel, since he felt like that was settled, he went to the psychological evidence. He went at all angles on this thing, like all angles. He was just fighting his way through this. He even made the claim like, okay, what if everyone was hypnotized? I mean, this guy fought at every angle he could. This book is just so thorough. I loved it. Strobel also examined Jesus' psychological profile to determine whether he could have been delusional or deceitful. And this is something I want to go into detail in further videos, because why should we ever follow a religion where the leader was deceitful, where they were crazy, or using their power to manipulate or control others? I personally don't want to ever believe something is true that cannot be argued for and can only be argued against. I don't want to solely rely on faith. The first book of God in the Bible the first word referring to God in the Bible is logos. That translates to logic. So the Bible itself argues for logic as a word for God. If God created people and he created us to have logic in the first place, why wouldn't he use that through historical texts that he left for us to know him better and to follow him, or even have a choice to follow him or not? This book went into so many details. I just could not. And Strobel examined Jesus' psychological profile with Dr. Gary Collins, who's a prominent psychologist, and he provided thorough analysis of Jesus' psychological profile from all the documents that we have. So Collins explained, Jesus consistently exhibited healthy and stable psychological traits. He was loving but not emotionally dependent. He showed anger without rage. He was passionate without being unbalanced. Collins emphasized that Jesus' psychological profile did not match that of someone suffering from a mental illness. And his teachings, relationships, and behavior all point to a well-adjusted, healthy individual. And Collins noted that this psychological evidence added another layer of credibility to Jesus' claims and character. Oh God, it's just so thorough, guys. Next, Strobel went into the scientific perspective. This book basically argues that you can use logic for a faith-based system of beliefs, which is totally opposite from what we are normally used to, because science usually we think of it as separate from Christianity. The two cannot mix. They can't, because one is spiritual and cannot be seen, and one is factual and is seen. So let's get into this. So he interviewed Dr. William Lane Craig, who argued for the existence of a creator based on the fine-tuning of the universe. Dr. Craig stated, "The fine-tuning of the universe is best explained by the existence of a designer who has made it just right for the emergence of intelligent life." Dr. Stephen Meyer, who is prominent in intelligent design of the universe, also contributed to Strobel's understanding of the scientific evidence. So Meyer argues the information-rich structures in DNA are best explained by an intelligent cause rather than undirected natural processes. This scientific evidence enforced the plausibility of a creator and further challenged Strobel's beliefs. Finding that was like, okay, you've made an argument with all of that, people. Strobel moved on. Next was medical evidence, the crucifixion. If Jesus didn't die, all of this is crap. None of it matters, because if Jesus didn't die, of course there'd be an empty tomb, and of course people would think he's resurrected because he's alive. So there has to be a death. And so he went to a medical examiner, which is just crazy. So this guy was, he went to just every angle on this. Strobel delved into the medical evidence of the crucifixion with Dr. Alexander Metheril. I think that's how you say his name. He is a physician who explained the physiological aspects of Jesus' death. It was very gruesome to read, but again, it's so, so good. And basically, the Passion of the Christ movie is completely wrong, and it was worse than that. It was so much worse. I don't even think they could have done that in the movie, because it was so gruesome. It's like horrific. They didn't even come close to the gruesome nature of the crucifixion. Metheril described the physical trauma that Jesus endured, and he said, the whipping alone would have left Jesus critically injured with deep, gaping wounds. Dr. Metheril also detailed the effects of the crucifixion, including hypovolemic shock, asphyxiation. The weight of the body pulling down on the outstretched arms would have made it very difficult to exhale, and eventually leading to suffocation. And he explained all of this very medically, and that's as good as I can do. Now, the medical evidence corroborated the historical accounts of Jesus' death, and it did add a somber reality of the crucifixion's nature. Now, one thing that I think is very, very important is the whole spear thing. When Romans stabbed Jesus, one really crucial aspect of that is the Romans would not have said Jesus was dead, knowing that they would be killed. Executioners of the time, if they said someone was dead and they didn't end up dead, they would be killed themselves. So that's very good to know too. Also, these Roman soldiers were death experts. They know how to kill people. That was their job. So that was pretty interesting. Strobel, thinking that this is like, okay, I see your point. That's good enough evidence for me. He moved on. The legal evidence. So Strobel consulted with Dr. Edwin Yamachi, I hope that's how you say it, a historian, to discuss the non-Christian sources that mention Jesus. Yamachi highlighted text by Tacitus, Josephus, the Pliny the Younger, and he stated that these sources confirmed the existence of Jesus and some aspects of his life and death, providing external validation outside of the New Testament accounts to the New Testament accounts. Yamachi emphasized the importance of these external sources by saying they show that even non-Christian historians acknowledged Jesus' existence and his execution under Pontius Pilate. This external validation further strengthened the historical case for Christ. And seeing that that was another valid argument, Strobel moved on to the archaeological evidence. I think later, Lee Strobel, he's very precise on the details, but part of this in the book was actually some archaeological evidence cited was disproven later, and even Strobel in the book says that he was like, I don't know about this, but let's talk about it. So the ones that were, let's talk about the ones that are still viable. So Strobel still examined the archaeological evidence that supports the New Testament. John McRae, an archaeologist, says, archaeological findings have consistently supported the historical reliability of New Testament accounts. Whereas Mormonism in America, no archaeological facts have been found. And I just thought that was a pretty interesting fact that Strobel included. McRae pointed out discoveries such as the Pool of Bethesda, the pavement Gabbatha, where Jesus was tried, and the Pilate Stone, which confirms the existence of Pontius Pilate. And these findings provide tangible evidence that the places and people mentioned in the Gospels were real. So Strobel being like, okay, I get that argument and I think it's credible. He moved on. Next was the prophecy evidence. Strobel investigated the prophetic evidence concerning Jesus. So he spoke with Dr. Louis Lapidus, a Jewish Christian scholar who explained how the New Testament prophecies were fulfilled in Jesus. It's crazy. So Lapidus remarked, the prophecies about the Messiah in the Hebrew scriptures pointed directly to Jesus of Nazareth. So taking Old Testament and cross-examining, Lapidus highlighted prophecies such as Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22, which describe the suffering servant and the crucifixion in remarkable detail. These prophecies were written centuries before Jesus and were fulfilled precisely in his life and death. I'm going to look at the facts here. I'm going to read this because I can't remember this. So, did Jesus and Jesus alone match the identity of the Messiah? Hundreds of years before Jesus was born, prophets foretold the coming of the Messiah, or the Anointed One, who would redeem God's people. In effect, dozens of these Old Testament prophecies created a fingerprint that only the true Messiah could fit. These gave Israel a way to point out imposters. Very, very logical, right? So Jerusalem's like, Israel, people of Israel, Jews, they're like, we're going to, whoever's the next Messiah that is prophesied about, we have to make sure that all of these details are right, and that's going to be our little court case for whoever says they're the Messiah, right? And that gave Israel a way to rule out imposters and validate the credentials of the authentic Messiah. Against astronomical odds, one chance in a trillion, 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 trillion. Jesus, and only Jesus throughout history, matched this prophetic fingerprint. Those are the odds. Like what? This confirms Jesus' identity to an incredible degree of certainty, Strobel says. Crazy. Gosh. Strobel being like, okay, good enough evidence for me, he moves on to the transformative power of faith. So after 2 years of exhaustive investigation, Strobel reached a critical juncture. He kept cross-examining with even more literature than he mentions in the book for basically 2 years total. 2 years total, he's reading and researching. Strobel reached a critical juncture at this point of 2 years, pointed compellingly toward Christianity being true. Reflecting on his journey, he wrote, "I realized that it would take more faith to maintain my atheism than to become a follower of Jesus." So this was the turning point of Strobel's faith journey, from skepticism to faith. And so it was not merely intellectual at this point, but this is when it became deeply personal and spiritual for him. So he describes his conversion experience vividly. He says, "I talked with God in a heartfelt and unedited plea. 'All right,' I said, 'you win.' I made a decision to believe, to say yes to Jesus' invitation to follow him." So Lee Strobel's A Case for Christ is a powerful testament to the power of evidence-based faith. Seeking the truth, you'll find it, and being unbiased. And I constantly try to, if I see inaccuracies, I like to research it, because if something's true, you can prove it. Truthfully, every time I've done this with the Bible, I've seen more and more and more truth. And it's just compelled me to be like, okay, okay. Because every single time I look for truth on both sides, and I did this in college. I went in an unbiased way toward, okay, I'm going to really test my faith. And it was hard and it was scary, but if you do that, you will find truth. And you got to look at both sides. You got to look at sides that you haven't considered before. But I'm so much happier now that I did. I don't have a fear of like, oh, what if this isn't true? It's a deep, deep faith, and I'm happy. I'm peaceful. And I like to keep challenging myself. And I have a lot less judgment for other beliefs too, because of doing this. And there are so many things that I've learned. And this faith is a loving faith. And if you're doing it to a biblical source material and not from man-made religion, my gosh, it helps you love people deeper and be more empathetic, and it helps you become a healthier, happier person. So that is why I did a book summary today. This book, so good. Even if you're an atheist, go read it. If you're open-minded and truly want to look at things unbiased and find truth, read this, give it a look, and it's awesome. And another book review is coming soon. We have 88 videos to go, and thank you so much for being on this journey with me. Stay mainstay. I'll see you in the next one.